as Kathy's putting up the slides, this is really a working group that's not set up yet. We think within the project and the steering committee is something that might be set up later this year. I'm giving you some background on a research stroke clinical proposal that's been submitted to Duchenne UK along the lines of nutrition in DMD. I may have, in some kind of semi-coma, agreed to co-lead this working group with Kathy, but I'm also looking for clinicians who know of dietetic colleagues, particularly those who've got interest in or experience in neuromuscular conditions, to join this working group in the future, but potentially to do a duet with me. All right. So, so this research proposal, as I say, is being considered by Duchenne UK. It is a collaborative proposal with a couple of my real good colleagues in human nutrition in the University of Glasgow. Professor Lucy Bray, who is a professor in pediatric nursing in Edge Hill in Liverpool, who has got expertise in qualitative research. Dr. Nicola Crabtree, who I have got very close links with, who is a clinical scientist and densitometrist in Birmingham, who's got expertise in bone, but also body composition. But critically, also Dr. Zoe Davison, who, if those of you are not aware, is probably the only only academic nutritionist who have published in nutrition, metabolic changes in neuromuscular conditions, largely DMD, but I think to some extent spinal muscular dystrophy as well. Zoe and I have known each other for several years. In a nutrition in DMD workshop in 2018, Ross was also an invited delegate in that workshop. And she's very kindly agreed to be part of this research grant. She's done some relatively similar work, and I think there's opportunities to combine data. But Zoe will also, although she lives in Melbourne, she's currently on maternity leave, but coming back in a few months' time, Zoe will also be able to provide some expert advice to this working group. So I think due to the time difference, to expect her to be consistently part of the working group will probably be a little bit difficult. So perhaps I can highlight just a couple of points which I think should be critically obvious. Weight gain and significant obesity is common in DMD. I looked at the BMI of my boys with DMD in the Glasgow clinic, and at the last time point before each child loses ambulation, only 10% had a normal BMI, right? But we know all this, I'm sure. It has got impacts on physical health, but I think critically, what we also now recognize, or perhaps patients have been telling us, is that it has got significant impact on mental health of these young adolescents. Referring back to the family survey that we've heard a lot about all throughout today, but very just briefly, almost half, 46% of the respondents state that they have never ever had any nutrition input or advice. But that's not because we don't necessarily want to, but access is pretty much not possible in a lot of sites. What do we already know currently? There's a small amount of data, including a paper from Zoe, that showed that young ambulatory boys with DMD are already overeating. So in fact, giving structured nutritional advice could be very important. It's not going to solve everything, but I think we need to address that. But there's also very limited information on the absolute caloric needs of boys with DMD, which is likely to be vastly different from a boy of the same age. And this is one of the research agenda that was identified with the workshop that Ross and I was at. In fact, we were in that same group trying to identify what other research questions to identify. And finally, a nutritional education program that's catered specifically for boys with DMD, just not the generic information, but also has the input of the carer and the young person, is very important. In this research, we're hoping to adapt something that Zoe Davidson's developed in Australia, and I'll talk you through that briefly. So in this project, we will also have staffing that will develop nutritional resources catered for boys with DMD from the offset based on what we know currently. And it may not be correct, but we've got to go with what we know currently. We aim to develop some sort of a survey asking for common meals that boys with DMD eat. There's no point giving them goji berry type juices when they don't drink, but maybe they do, right? And then we'll develop healthy versions of these recipes based on advice from our nutritionists, examples, and we aim to cater to the range of people that we see in the UK as well. Just like psychosocial, we recognize that there is actually a bottleneck in accessing dietitians who've got expertise, and there will be some clinical dietitian funded to develop some sort of a national pathway to see a small number of boys for education. And that addresses the lack of manpower. A couple of research studies that we will develop. One is a retrospective study looking specifically at body composition after starting steroids and also after losing ambulation. And what's critical is that this is using routinely collected DEXA data for bone density. But what has actually been an issue is that the lack of normative data of body composition in large-scale healthy children. But Nick Crabtree published a bone density DEXA study of healthy children in the UK about 6-7 years ago from about 5,000 healthy children. She's developing some centile curves on lean mass and fat mass in healthy children, which will be part of this project, but it's already ongoing, which we then can use in future studies for generation of standard deviation of Z scores as part of this study and also in future studies. And this helps us identify the timing of weight gain in these boys to then tell us when we are best putting in any intervention, education, or in the future, any pharmacological drugs that we want to try. We're also aiming to do some metabolic studies. And so we've got some of these, and that's aimed to combine some data. More importantly, is also the qualitative research from interviews, focus group, which Lucy and her team will actually perform to figure out a little bit more about the impact of weight gain and obesity on mental health and day-to-day living. Zoe developed a 12-week face-to-face nutritional education program in Australia, catered for boys with DMD. It is obviously laborious, it is face-to-face. We're aiming in these interviews and focus groups, which includes adolescents, parents, but also clinicians in the UK, so all of you, about adapting the SNOPE program to be a, what I think, or what we think, a sort of online with some human interaction program that is suitable for implementation in the UK that can actually be developed in the future with future funding. Of course, at the end of this research, we will revise any nutritional guidance based on what we find from our study, combining the other Zoe study or future published study in a few years' time. So, like I say, we are very interested to hear from people who are interested to join this group. We want some neuromuscular conditions, we want dietitians, we want some of my pediatric endocrinology colleagues as well, because I think other than just the nutritional component, we need to have some further discussion and review of the literature on the utility of certain medication. I believe that some sites may have used medication like metformin, for instance, for weight management. Those sites, I urge you to share and publish your data so that we actually have got a lot more experience, whatever people have used. And also, I think it will need to link in with psychosocial because it's closely linked, and also with physios in terms of what we advise for movement as well.